Here we will handle the edge drawing part of the apron. First, fold it and iron it. Cut this size directly according to the dimensions provided in the drawing. No need any extra flair. After ironing it, we draw a line upward from the folded position. For example, after folding, the width is only 1.2 centimeters. Then we need to leave a 5 millimeter margin. That means drawing a line 7 millimeters above this crease. If only 1 centimeter remains, then we draw a line at the 5 millimeter position. Ultimately, this line goes up. Leave a 5 millimeter margin at the opening position. The specific amount depends on the dimensions on your drawing. Then we measure and draw a dashed line along the edge. Sew a line 2 millimeters from each side of the guideline. Avoid backstitching at both ends. Widen the needle area slightly. I'm using a size 4 here. We should sew the gathering line on the same side. After finishing the sewing, pull both bottom threads tight at the same time. Pull this pleat out. Be careful when pulling out the fold. We can just pull this bottom thread tight with our right hand. With the left hand, bring this fabric in towards the left like this. This way, the folds will form. You can't just keep pulling the line on the right. The left hand doesn't move. You feel that one side of the fold is tighter and harder to pull. Let's switch to the 2 bottom lines on the other end and continue folding. Once this is done, we will adjust the size and uniformity. Adjust its length to match what we need for the apron now. This part of the lace is uniform. Align the top and bottom seam lines. Attach this lace to the front of the apron. At this moment, the opening of the lace is oriented to the right, and to the left is its folded side. Once the car is ready, it seems there are no issues. Then remove the gathering line at the front. Then we take another piece of fabric and place it at the bottom. The front sides of the apron fabric we just processed are facing each other. The middle part features the lace. Along the seam where we just sewed the lace, sew it one more time. After gathering it properly, we trim off the excess fabric at the bottom. Make some notches at the curved areas. Then we will turn this part to the front. Gently press the edges. Sisters who are skilled at sewing bright lines. We sew a circle of bright lines along the edge. Next, we are at the position without any stitching. On both sides of this seam line, there are 2 millimeters. There is a perforated line on each side. For the distance on this side, a measurement of 3 units is sufficient. Do not backstitch at the start and finish. Leave the thread ends a little longer. Pull the 2 bottom lines closer to pull this one out. Then set it aside for now. For the flying sleeves part, let's take a piece of fabric. Fold it in half first. Iron it briefly. Once it has been pressed, we take out the pattern for the flying sleeves. Align the position of this straight edge. Align it with the crease we just pressed. Then outline its edges. After drawing, focus on this position on both sides. We leave a 5 millimeter margin. Trim off the excess parts. But this line is curved. Do not trim the edges of these fabrics for now. Let's first thread this. Trim it after measuring. Of course you can trim it in advance. I just feel that this part is quite narrow. If we trim after measuring the line later, it will be easier for you to handle this fabric now. This area also involves double line pleating. At a point 2 millimeters on either side of this design line. There is a gathered line on each side. Do not backtrack the needle before and after. The needle I'm using here is size 4. Leave the thread ends on both sides a little longer, after measuring it correctly. Now, we will modify this curved position. Trim the excess fabric on this edge. Leave a 5 millimeter seam. Be careful not to cut off the end of the thread we're pulling. Then pull both bottom threads tight at the same time. Pull out this fold. If one side feels tight, switch to the other end and pull the 2 bottom lines. The wing sleeves require repeating the steps twice to make another identical one. Then, we have a total of 4 pieces in the strap section, according to the measurements provided in the drawing. Add a normal 5 millimeter margin to all 4 sides and cut it down. First, take out one piece. Then the size after we remove this flying sleeve. It must match the length of this strap part. Place them facing each other. When sewing here, the position of the flying sleeve opening and the style position are aligned in the same direction. Align the upper and lower style lines and sew them directly. Check it after you have finished sewing. If there are no issues, remove the basting line. Then take out another piece of fabric for the strap. Align the part we just processed with the front side of the newly taken strap fabric. This is what is placed in between. We follow the stitching line from the flying sleeve we just sewed. Sew it once more. After sewing, we need to trim the seams. But I need to point out a problem. For example, what I'm currently working on is a small size. This design is definitely too wide at 5 millimeters, because the strap is also about 5 millimeters wide, so we need to trim it here. However, if you are working with larger sizes, it may not require much trimming, or possibly not need any trimming at all. Everyone decides, based on the actual circumstances when doing this, whether this approach needs trimming. If I'm working with small sizes like I am now, I might trim it down to just 2 or 3 millimeters. If I were to do it in quarter sizes, I might trim it down to about 3 millimeters. If it's because I haven't worked with any particularly large sizes yet, if we make a larger size, I might not even need to trim it. Then we flip the lace to the front, like in the video. The position of the edges of the 2 straps, we use an iron to press it flat. After the pressing is done, we can work on the front side of this fabric. Like this, I will create the design line at the bottom. Then make another strap like this. Here we will work on the upper middle part of the apron. First, fold and press the fabric below. Then there is a fold line here. Align the dashed line of the fold with the crease position below. Then we can draw the position of the lower half, and that will be it. After drawing, we will cut out this section, the positions of the 3 lines with marked edges. We trim an additional 5 millimeters outward, then we have a marked fold position at this location. We mark this position in the same place. Next, this line and this line. The position of these 2 lines, we are moving outwards towards the edges on both sides. About 1 millimeter from each side, draw a dashed line. You can use 3 for this line. Do not backstitch at the beginning and end. Leave the thread ends a little longer. Take a look after you finish changing it. A fold line was removed from each of these 2 positions. Now regarding these 2 lines, what I'm currently working on is a small size. The distance is relatively short, then I'll pull both baseline lines together directly. If you are working with larger sizes, these 2 lines will be slightly farther apart. Then we will pull this baseline line individually. It's all fine. Anyway, the values from these 2 positions are extracted. After extraction, let's take a look. It's this position on our drawing. It specifies how many centimeters after folding. This is the position. After we finish extracting it, adjust it to approximately how many centimeters, not including the seams on both sides. This position below is also noted. Then it is adjusted to approximately the same length. The stitching dimensions on both sides. You shouldn't include this. Only consider the position between the 2 red lines. Once adjustments are made, we take out a piece of lace. We need to position it here on both sides of this red line. Attach this lace to it. It's on this lace. A line is drawn on each side. It is in the middle of these 2 lines. There is a gap of a few millimeters. We are at this position of a few millimeters. We can then thread a line through. You like to wear ribbons, or you can say using any kind of thread is fine. As for me, it's simply sewing thread. Just ordinary sewing thread will do. It's just using a bit more of this root element. Directly thread it through, or directly use that kind of thick embroidery thread. Either is fine. Use whatever you have. After wearing it, we will secure it on both sides. Sew a few stitches to secure it. Sew up both sides. Then the excess ribbon, or you can simply trim the thread. Then take out the strap we prepared earlier. Attach the part we just prepared. Align it with the front side of the strap. A strap consists of 2 pieces of fabric. These 2 pieces of fabric need to be unfolded. We only need to use one of the pieces of fabric. Just ensure the front sides are facing each other. Sew along the marked stitch line. Once the sewing is complete, this part is flipped to the front. It appears like this. Next, we take out another strap. Similarly, we will use these 2 pieces of fabric. Unfold it like this. And one of the fabric pieces, sew them together with the right sides facing each other. After sewing, we take the 2 straps and flip them over to the side like this. It is just like this. Then this position at the bottom isn't the line for the car just in front of us. You can directly drive a fixed line over. It is to avoid pulling it apart here, because the pull wire can move. But when you secure the wiring of the car, you should definitely confirm. The dimensions here has been adjusted to the appropriate length. Once this step is completed, we will proceed with the other steps. This part is folded. It is securely fixed. This prevents the vehicle from loosening. After securing the line car, the pull line on top of it, you can take it off. Next, we will flip this part over. Earlier, we talked about this middle part, the edge where the cars meet. We will take this part on top. This is the area that is not stitched along the seam line, folded in this way towards the reverse side. After folding it well, we will position the crease, use an iron to press it flat. The other strap follows the same procedure. After pressing it, the reverse side looks like this. Then on both sides, aren't there 2 pieces of fabric for the straps? When it comes to this fabric, it also follows this stitching line. Fold inward. After folding it well, iron it briefly. After ironing it well, take note. This refers to the section we are stitched together with in the middle, the part that is stitched together. Its style might be somewhat broad. This style can be adjusted a little. However, if you don't think it's broad, you don't trim. But basically small sizes all need to be trimmed. After trimming, we will take the fabric from these 2 straps on the same side. Fold them together like this. If there are sisters who have water dragon glue, you can first use the water dragon glue to stick it in the middle. Then we can flip it to the front to work on it. It will be easier to work on, especially for sisters who make small-sized items. Here we are stitching a line from the edge inward. Secure the position of the opening we just created. The area near the edge close to the rust on both sides. You can also stitch a visible line inward. Make this side more even. After we finish processing the upper part, it looks like this. Each side of the strap has a seam. After handling it properly, this part is kept in reserve for now. These 2 pieces of the waist section, one of them is this piece on the outer side. We need to make 2 marks on it, based on the positions of those 2 marks on the drawing. Then this piece with the marks made. Let's fold it this way. Locate its center point. Make a mark as well. Next, take out what we prepared earlier, the top part of this apron. Fold the bottom edge in half. Find the center point and mark it. Sew it with a basting stitch. Attach the upper part to this section of the waist. Next, let's handle the 2 straps on the back. Directly turn this part over like this. The middle part of the strap, you can't flip it over, just turn it over a little bit like this. Then align the edge with the position of this mark. Directly secure the wind line vertically. The strap on the other side is handled in the same way. This part should look like this once properly handled. The center mark aligns with the center of the upper section. Next, the marks on both sides. Align the edges of the two straps. Then we will turn the style on both sides to face the back. Fold it in like this. Fold along the line. Next, take out the other piece for the waist. Fold this design on both sides. Also fold inward along the style line towards the back. And here I would like to point out, this refers to the one I'm working on. My style line is drawn on the front of the fabric. If I fold it this way, it will be easier to do. Anyway, remember to fold towards the back side. Just fold these patterns into it. Then, referring to this longer edge among them, also fold along the pattern line towards the back side. The other long edge does not need to be folded. Then we will take the edge that has not been folded and the part we just processed. This is the edge of the upper part of the apron that we have sewn. Sew it together with the right. First, we cut out the shape of the bottom layer using felt. This part requires two. Use one and keep the other as a backup. Then here I used black and white elastic for the edges, which are both elastic. This one has a width of approximately 6 millimeters. Then we make small cuts on the part we need. Cut at the part of the elastic band. The white border also needs a cut at the elastic band. The video showing the cut in the black part may not be very clear. Since it's too dark, everyone take another look at the white part. Then we apply glue all over the felt heart. This side uses alcohol glue. Wrap the black elastic border around this heart. Trim off the excess border. At this point, the back looks like this. The outer lace will be slightly larger than the inner base. Then we apply some glue to the part of the black lace elastic band. Only apply it to the elastic band section. Don't let it get onto the lace part on the outside. Then we wrap this white lace around the inside like this. It should just cover the part of the black elastic band. On our drawing, the surface section has 4 hearts like this. Some sizes may feature 3 instead. Here, we will use it to cover the central part of this white lace elastic band. Select the one that is closest, because each person's wrapping size is definitely different. So we have several options here. Just use the one that is closest. Once you've made your selection, we'll cut this heart shape from the black felt. Once the black heart is cut, we'll cut 2 strips of ribbon. Then apply glue to its back and attach it in the shape of a cross. After it's attached, we will also apply glue to the back of the black part and stick it to the center of the white lace. After sticking it on, we flip it over and attach this strap. If it's a small size, I suggest using a narrower ribbon. Currently, this size is relatively large and I'm using this narrower lace. Here, I will insert a small-sized one. For a small size, just cross this ribbon and stick it on. For the large size, I am using this single-sided houndstooth lace. If this dogtooth pattern is crossed directly like this, one side is outward facing while the other side is inward facing. I want them all to face outward, so I need to trim the middle section. After cutting, we stick it on like this in the video. In this way, the zigzag edge will all face outward. Of course, if the lace you're using is different from mine, if both sides have the same kind of symmetrical lace, then you can just stick it on normally like the ribbon in front. Then we will cover this entire section of the felt cloth with glue. Place another layer of felt cloth on top. Once it dries completely, our eye mask will be ready. Let's take a look at the drawing issue regarding tosha. Because the 4-part tosha is too large, so it needs to be spliced. The outer top and bottom are connected like this. Then after we finish drawing one side, flip over to draw the other half. The middle part is not lifted. They are all connected together. The other piece consists of the upper and lower inside. It is done in the same way. After finishing one side, flip it over to paint the other half. Do not lift it in the middle. After cutting it out, it looks like this. And then this part, it doesn't need to be sewn at home. Just cut it according to the pattern. No extra additions are needed. The longer one is the inner layer, and the shorter one is the outer layer. Then we need to apply the outer and inner layers. This outer circle, add some lace. Directly attach the lace to the front of this mesh fabric. Position of the left edge of the lace. About the position of the edge of the underlying mesh fabric. Along the right edge of the lace, 1 or 2 millimeters inward. Directly secure it with stitching. After completing the removal, the words beneath this lace. Isn't there a layer of tulle fabric? Because we are sewing directly on it. Here we need to trim this tulle fabric a bit, away from our stitching line. It's positioned about 2 or 3 millimeters. Then cut away the excess. Be careful while cutting. We only cut the mesh fabric at the bottom here. Make sure not to cut off the lace part. This is how it looks after being processed. Then we apply the same method. We also need to properly process the projection of the other layer. The dimensions of the positions for these 2 layers projections are identical. We will align them. Pay attention to these 2 layers of tosha. They are all facing upwards. The outer layer is on top. The inner layer is at the bottom. Then we need to address this unstitched area. 2 layers stacked together. Make a double stitch tuck on it, slightly inward from the edge of the mesh fabric. We are about 4 to 5 millimeters apart. Sew 2 lines on it. Because it is a mesh fabric, I didn't use a very wide seam allowance here. I used about 3.5. Do not backstitch at the beginning and end. Leave the thread ends a bit longer. Simultaneously tighten both bottom lines. Extract this pleat after properly pulling the pleat. Set this section aside for now. Now, the front side of the fabric. Sketch the soil sample of this headband. It's easier to align these positions on the front. Next, we'll follow the positions indicated on the blueprint. Sew these ribbons onto it. Once it is finished sewing, let's differentiate the front and back of the headband. The front refers to the position on the forehead. The back is the position at the back of the head. For example, concerning this edge of mine, I plan to position it at the back of the head. I will make a mark here. Now we need to add lace. When adding lace, there will be a joint position. So we place this position at the back of the head. This side edge, be careful when attaching the trim to the vehicle. Our opening remarks, move this lace forward by 2 centimeters. This makes it easier for us to connect later. Then follow this design line. Sew the lace onto it while sewing. The lace on the right is the elastic part. The left side is the lace section. In other words, it's an exposed lace. As we approach the corner of our driveway, you can cut some slits in the loose part. After making the cuts, then it will be easier for you to turn. The lane is about to start. At this moment, we set aside this unnecessary embellishment at the start. First, let's set it aside for now, then continue driving forward. Starting position in the lane, when it's roughly a few millimeters, you can stop now, then we will start with this trim at the beginning and end. Align it this way, along the edge of the fabric, sew straight down, sew them together to secure. Trim the excess lace after sewing. Leave about 3 millimeters. Just sewing will be fine. The parts on both ends, you can make some cuts on the fabric. This will make it a bit smoother. Then we take out the materials. This is a ribbon used for tying on the head. Sew it directly in the positions on either side. The fixed position. Do not go beyond our car, the place where the lace pattern appears, after both ends of the car are fixed. This is the way it is. Then we take out the part of the head sand. The dimensions after measurement are taken. And the 2 trees mentioned. The dimensions of the position of this black line are consistent after the adjustments are made. Sewing the front side together. Pay attention to our top layer of sand. It is the outer layer. This layer, which is relatively shorter, this is the front side. Consider this as the front side, because after we complete it, this outer layer, it is in the most surface position. Then we will take it out. Another piece of fabric from the belt, stitched together with it. My reverse mouth is left in the car. The position of the head sand. About this segment, you are better at flipping. Just keep it a little narrow. It's less likely to flip. Just keep it a little wide. Then we have 2 pieces on top and bottom. The material of this belt, align the front sides facing each other. In my direction, begin sewing first. Start sewing from this spot. First, drive the car close to it. This turn, the position of the marker I just made. You can stop here, hit the reverse needle. Be careful when sewing. Do not put the ribbon in. This long part should be sewn. Place it in the area that does not need sewing. Just let it sit for a while. Then leave a gap in the middle. From another one of these, the marked point of the reverse side, start to continue stitching. When stitching to this side, we place this head sand, the entire thing, to the position of the reversed opening. Insert it from the middle, including this ribbon. Also insert it together. This way it won't be sewn onto anything. Then we will continue. Sew up all the remaining sections completely. When we are sewing here, it's all along the front stitching. This lace is sewn with a machine. Then we sew the 2 ends together. Just trim it a little. Make some snips, the right angle position. We can cut it diagonally like this. Trim some of the fabric like this. Be careful not to cut the ribbon too short. Here we are making these leggings. Both parts are elastic. The upper part is a black elastic band. The lower part features this double-sided lace. The middle part is also elastic. Concerning the middle section, we will place the 2 black edges. All vehicle lines must be secured properly. Be careful when aligning the vehicle. We need to focus on this part of the top and bottom layers. They are all pulling the car in our direction. If the car isn't being pulled, this tension will be secured by the stitching in the car. Pull the elasticity away from the car, then this elastic part is still present. This way, it will be easier to wear. The stitching on both sides is identical. Make sure to pull it apart. Once the sewing is finished, we will align the 2 sides facing each other. The position of the seam line is 5 millimeters in from the edge. Directly sew it in place, trim the edge a bit, leave about 3 millimeters. Then we turn it to the front. This leg sleeve is ready. Here we're going to make some socks. First, stretch the sock this way. It has elasticity. It must use premium fabric. Then we are at the top position. We need to sew a lace trim. Be careful when using the lace trim. The fabric underneath is facing up. Then the lace trim should be elastic lace. Be careful while sewing. We cannot sew it evenly. This will cause the fabric to lose its elasticity. Here we need to take care of the lace on top. And the fabric below, stretch it towards our direction simultaneously. Apply a bit of force, pull this elastic apart. Sew the areas for getting in and out. Remember to pull at the same time. You can't just pull the lace at the top, or the fabric underneath. After the sewing is done, let's flip it over to the back. First, fold the lace at this position up. Scroll down further, this way, the design will be wrapped in the fabric. Then we trace along the edge, draw a line along the side, secure this position. You should be careful while sewing here. You need to stretch the fabric as you sew. Open up the fabric. You must do this action, otherwise you'll just sew it flat. This thread will stabilize the elasticity at this position. Fix it in place, so when you put on the socks later, it will be very difficult to pull the sock cuff up. After sewing, turn it to the back of the fabric. We draw the shape of our socks. Draw it onto the design. After the drawing is complete, this point on the straight line, fold it this way, then we draw along the edge. Mark the position to make the collar, we place the 2 pieces of fabric face to face and sew the 2 woven edges together. For the rest, we sew directly along this red line. At the beginning and end, we extend a 5 millimeter seam allowance outward. Then, in the areas without sewing, we leave a 5 millimeter seam allowance and cut it off. In the sewn areas, we make some notches with pinking shears. If we don't have pinking shears, we can use regular scissors to create some notches. Then we turn the 2 trimmed collars to the right side and press them flat. Those skilled at sewing can stitch along the edge. Here, we take 2 pieces of fabric for the hem, place them face to face, and first sew the top edge. Next, we trim this part of the small lettering by sewing, and finally, we need to make a straight cut into this section. We shouldn't cut into the stitching at this position, but you need to cut a bit deeper. Then we turn this section to the front, press it, and check the sewn edge along the line again. Once the bright line is drawn properly, it looks like this. Repeat the steps to create another opening like this on your own. Then prepare it first. Here, we will handle the position of the rusty edge. For this edge, we will first create a fold. This is a double fold. This is located 2 millimeters from each side of the sewing line with a fold line on each side. Do not backstitch at the front and back. For this sewing area, I used a 3-stitch technique as this distance is not very wide. 3 is sufficient. After properly folding, we will simultaneously tighten 2 bottom lines to pull out this fold. The bottom edge after folding matches the size of our rusty edge. When stitching here, we only sew 1 piece of this rust-colored fabric. This piece of fabric is the bottom of the 2, meaning that when finished, it faces inward, not outward. For example, at the sleeve cuff position, I stitched a visible line. So the side we just stitched with the visible line is the front side of this piece of fabric. The piece below is the back side of this fabric. Now we are stitching this back side, aligning it with the front side of the sleeve fabric, and sewing along the top and bottom. After measuring, check it yourself. If there are no issues, remove the gathering line from the front. After measuring, slightly trim the stitched line to about 3 millimeters. Then we will unfold the stitched area and the fabric of the sleeve like this, lightly scraping this position with a fingernail or pressing it with an iron. Then we turn it to the back to check. We need to fold the fabric of the cuff at this position along the seam line, ensuring the folded area covers the stitching line in front. Measure a straight line along the edge to secure this position. After measuring, we will fold the cuff towards the front of the sleeve like this, temporarily securing it by sewing a few stitches a couple of millimeters in from both side edges. Use the same method for the other side of the sleeve. Then we set this part aside for now. Here we will work on the front and back pieces of the outer and inner layers. First, we will stitch the front and back pieces of the inner layer together at the shoulder seam, facing each other like this. After measuring, we will unfold the front and back pieces, separating the shoulder seam allowances to the sides. You can scrape it with a fingernail or press it with an iron. Then we will repeat the steps. Process the front and back pieces of the outer part in the same way. Then fold the neckline of the front part in half, find the center point, and make a mark. There is also a marking point at the back on both sides. Mark it according to the drawing on the front side of the fabric, and when we attach the collar, the starting position will align with the marking points at the back. The end position at the front aligns with the center marking point. I have finished measuring one side of the collar, and will show you. We will attach the other side of the collar like this, ensuring no gap in the middle. After measuring the collar, it looks like this. Then we will place the inner and outer parts facing each other and measure along the line we just sewed for the collar. When sewing, start from the edge of the fabric and sew to the edge of the fabric on this side. After sewing, make some notches around the neckline. I'm using pinking shears. If you don't have them, use regular scissors to cut the notches. After processing, the neckline looks like this. Next, let's attach the sleeves. When attaching the sleeves, we only sew at the shoulder seam on the front side. When necessary, you can first place the sleeve toward the center. Take the previously prepared sleeve, fold it in half, and mark the center point. The center point will be where we align the seam. The curve of the sleeve differs from the curve of the shoulder seam. Therefore, we need to adjust the curve while sewing along the sewing line, and when sewing, the right sides should face each other. Using the same method, we will finish both sleeves. Once finished, it will look like this. Then we will align the side seams of the front and back pieces of the garment and sew them together with the sleeve side seams. After measuring this side, we will sew the side seams of the front and back pieces and the sleeve side seams of the other side in the same position, ensuring all fronts are facing each other. After measuring, we will make a few straight cuts at the armpit corners on both sides. Then, let's take a look at the lining. I haven't processed the position of the embroidery hoop on the lining. If you want to process it, you can follow the 2 methods in our tutorial folder for handling the embroidery hoop. When I usually make sample garments, I don't process this position. I directly sew the side seams of the front and back pieces together with the fronts facing each other. Then sew the side seam positions of the front and back pieces of the lining on the other side, which are also sewn with the right sides together. After sewing, we turn the upper part to the right side so the lining and the outer fabric are facing each other with wrong sides. Let's roughly organize it like this first, then set this part aside for now. For the skirt hem, we will cut it according to the dimensions given on the blueprint, adding an additional 5 millimeters to each side. I drew the pattern for the skirt hem on the right side of the fabric because we need to fold the bottom edge inward first and fold it to the wrong side along the sewing line. Draw the line on the right side and fold it to the wrong side like this. I think it will be easier to handle this way, so I drew it on the right side. You can also fold it according to your habits, and then we directly pull a line on the front to secure this style. Once it's pulled properly, the front and back will look like this, and then we will double line tuck the waist area. At a position 2 millimeters to the left and right of this style line, pull a tucking line and widen the line area slightly. I'm using 4 for the line area. Don't bring back the needle at the front and back, and leave the thread ends a bit longer. After securing the line, we pull in 2 bottom lines simultaneously to draw out this fold. If one side feels tighter, switch to the 2 bottom lines on the opposite side. The size of the fold at this position should match the bottom edge of the upper part here, as we need to sew them together face to face. After adjusting, we will sew the bottom edge of the upper part of the outer fabric to the gathered section of the skirt, together face to face. After taking it apart, check to ensure there are no issues, and we will remove the gathered line at the front. Now our skirt is in this state. The lining and outer fabric are connected only at the neckline, while the other parts remain separate. Then we will separate the lining fabric to both sides, and at the very bottom edge, fold it inward along the seam line. You can lightly press it with your fingernail like this, or you can iron the bottom edge to slightly fix the crease. Then we deal with the opening at the back of the lining and the outer fabric, placing the lining and the outer fabric right sides together. The bottom edge of the lining aligns perfectly with the seam of the outer fabric skirt, so overlap them and align. We sew directly along the seam line, and the other side of the back opening is processed in the same way. Then we trim the top of these 2 positions at an angle, and then we turn this part to the front to tidy it up. Now let's take a look at the bottom edge of the lining. There are 2 methods for handling the bottom edge. One is to align the crease position with the seam of the outer fabric skirt. Sew it together using the long needle method. Another method is to align this position and then directly sew to the visible line on the front to fix it. I'm too lazy to hand sew, so I just secured it with machine stitches. Next, the skirt sides haven't been sewn yet. We'll fold along the seam line and sew up from one side of the skirt to the neckline. Then, sew around the bottom of the neckline and come down from this side. Then we will iron the 2 collars, pressing down gently to smooth them out. Finally, sew the back together and attach either a button or Velcro. When we lift our sleeves, they are unlined, so here we need to make a slight adjustment to the position of the lining. Sisters with good skills, you can directly fold the fabric inward here. This way, you can fold the seams inward and make some cuts. Advice from beginner sisters. I suggest following my video for guidance. Here, we will cut a piece of thin interfacing and position this area facing the right side. Be aware that one side of the interfacing is adhesive. We will smooth it out. The non-sticky side is defined as the front. If you don't plan to purchase the interfacing, you can directly use a piece of this copper-colored lining fabric. It's the same. The advantage of using interfacing is simply that we can give it a final press after we're done. It allows the interfacing to adhere to the fabric. If they are bonded together, it will surely be smoother and more aesthetically pleasing. After the position is set correctly, we directly sew along the design line of the embroidery frame. After sewing, use pinked scissors to trim the design a bit. If there are no pinked scissors, just use ordinary scissors. Make some notches in the curved areas. Then we will flip this interfacing fabric, turn it to the back side of the lining fabric. You can use a steam iron to press it. You can also scrape it with your nails like I do. If you're using a steam iron for pressing, you must pay attention. Only press this small area of the fold. Don't press too deeply. Just wait for a moment for the excess pressing. We still need to trim this off. After folding it, we mark a line about 1 millimeter from the edge. Draw a clear line. Secure this part. After removing it properly, the excess interfacing on both sides here can be trimmed off. Then turn it over. Leave about 5 millimeters of interfacing. Trim off the excess parts as well. Then we use the gradient die. Die this part slightly. This step, we will see the use of the hot lining. There is still a distinction when using regular fabric, because if it's fusible interfacing, we can press it this way. It is bonded to the fabric underneath. It will be smoother. Finally, after we finish making the entire piece of clothing,